In this lesson, let's talk about contributing back to the framework. So it's important to remember that there's lots of ways to contribute to Laravel. So maybe if you don't feel like your coding skills are quite on that level, well, maybe you can fix typos. That's certainly a valid pull request. Maybe you can help out with documentation. Maybe if some bit of the documentation was a little confusing to you and you feel that you can word it better, well, fork the repository, make the improvements, and then submit your first pull request to Laravel. Let's take a look at how we could go about making a small fix. Now, before I continue on, it's important for me to note this is not a lesson on using GitHub or Git. If you're not familiar with those, this probably isn't the lesson for you. However, you're in luck because we have lots of Git training across Tuts Plus Premium. We have courses, we have tutorials, we have one-off screencasts, and I do highly recommend that you take a look at those. But assuming you do have a modest understanding, we're not going to be doing anything too fancy. But as long as you have a modest understanding, you'll be okay in this lesson. So if you go to the Laravel project on GitHub, you'll see these two at the top, Framework and Laravel. Now, Laravel is going to be more of the app, and Framework is going to be the one that you want to update. Just keep in mind that this isn't going to contain the app portion of a Laravel project. It's the source. It's what used to be called Illuminate. So let me give you an example of what we are going to fix. I was searching for the last couple days for something that would be an easy fix but would demonstrate the process of submitting a pull request, and I found one. So let's take a look at the, pretty new actually, the HTML builder. This simply gives you some helper functions using an HTML class. So things like entities or decode, or an easy way to create an ordered list or an unordered list. And you see here, you just give it an array of your list, any attributes, and that would be like the class equals X. And mostly there's not too much going on, at least at the time of this recording. So where is the bug that we want to fix? Well, let's take a look. Let's say you want to create an unordered list. Well, we would pass an array containing all of the items, and then if there are attributes, we can pass those through, but we don't have to. Laravel is going to set a default of array, because by default, you're not going to have any attributes. So let's see what that does. Well, it calls this listing static method. That will accept, of course, the type, the list, and the attributes. And then, and don't worry, you don't have to follow every single line, just stick with me here. We're going to filter through that list or through that array, and for each one, we're going to create a listing element. So now we come down here, and if it's just a single item, we're going to return the necessary HTML for a list item. But if it is an array, then we have a nested list. So we don't just have a top-level array containing some values. We're going to have an array with some nested items as well. So we want to make sure we allow for that. So he calls a nesting list. Now we come through here and we say, okay, is the key of that array item an integer? And if it is, that means it would be a nested array, in which case we recursively need to call that listing static method again. But this time, notice that we're only passing through the type, the value, but no attributes. So to refresh your memory, if we go back to listing, well, now we're passing in the type, we're passing in the list, but we're not passing through the attributes, and that's going to create a warning. Because remember, before here, we passed through the attributes each time we called the listing, but for that nested version, we didn't. So attributes is null at this point, and to give you an example of what that would do, here's essentially the exact same thing. We call a function, we pass A and B, but we leave off C, and that will generate a PHP warning unless you suppress it. So what we want to do is submit a pull request to ensure that attributes always is set to a default of an empty array. And that way those warnings won't be called in the case that you do have a nested array to work with. All right, let's see how we can go about doing that. If I scroll to the top, the first thing we should do is fork the repository. We're going to fork it to my personal account and give that just a few seconds. Now that we have our own version of the framework, I'm going to pull this down. And now we will git clone the framework, and I'm going to call it Laravel. Now keep in mind that if you are cloning the app repo, well then you would want to clone the develop branch, not the master branch. However, in this case, it's okay. So let's just give that a few seconds to download. And now I can cd into that project, list the files, and we're good to go. The next thing that I'm going to do is create a new branch. So let's git check out a new branch. And if it was a feature you were adding, maybe some new functionality, precede it with feature slash. That's sort of a common convention. In my case, though, I'm going to call it a bug. So we'll say bug, attributes, defaults to array. All right, so now we have our own branch that we can work on. And then when we submit our pull request, we're going to reference this specific branch. And then subsequently, if I have a new feature or bug, I'd create another branch. So each of them are contained. So now we just need to make our changes, commit them, and submit our pull request. Here I am within Sublime. I'm going to load the HTML builder, find the change that we need to make. In this case, it was to set the listening to a default of array. And really, that's the only change we need to make. So let's commit this. If I now run git status, you'll see, okay, we have updated that file. So let's add it and commit it with a message of attributes defaults to empty array. Great. Now if I run a git log, you'll see, yes, we have added that. So the final step is to push this branch up to our GitHub repo that we forked. To do that, I'm going to run git push origin and then that specific branch. And now that will take my changes and push them back up to GitHub. And if I return to my repo, refresh the page, you'll see that we now have two branches. So I will open that one up, take a look at it, and see what changes we made. And notice now we can view that commit, and Taylor, when he's reviewing this request, can look and see, okay, here's exactly what's going on. Now, before we move on, there's one thing that I do need to make note of. In this case, we're fixing a very tiny bug. So submitting a proposal is really a non-issue. However, if you would like to add some new functionality or feature, you should get approval first. And here's how you'd do that. You'd begin by going directly to the framework repo. Within the issues section, you're going to add a new issue, and you're going to precede it with proposal within brackets. So here's an example. This person wants to submit a pull request, but he's waiting on approval from Taylor, the creator of the framework. So let's see, we're not going to go over this, but he's going to cover exactly what functionality is missing or what he would like to add. And then eventually Taylor will respond to him and either give him a yay or nay. But like I said, in this case, we're fixing 5 characters, so I'm not going to worry about it. So let's backtrack to my repo. And now notice that because I forked it, I have this new button pull request. So we're going to do that right now. Now this page is very important. Because we are submitting to laravel/framework, we only have the master branch. However, if you were submitting to the app repo, laravel/laravel, you would want to submit your changes to the develop branch of that repo. In this case, though, we can submit to master. So now we're saying, okay, here is my forked repo. Here is the branch that I want to send to you, and I want to submit that pull request to laravel/framework and the master branch. Here is the name of my commit message, and now I'm going to provide just a little bit more detail so that he knows exactly what I'm referring to. All right, that should be fine, so I'm going to preview to make sure my markdown looks okay. And now, if I'm confident with all of my changes, I'm going to send the pull request. And that's it. So notice that now we've been redirected to the laravel/framework version of the repo. If we click on pull requests, now you'll see that the changes we made have been added here. And then at this point, Taylor and anyone else on the team for the project is going to receive an email. They're going to look over this and say, okay, looks like he made a small fix to ensure that attributes always has a default of an empty array. And then he will click on the commit right here to see what change I made, make sure the code looks good, make sure it's something that's useful. A lot of times people will submit pull requests to fix things that aren't broken in the framework, but maybe broken in their own implementation. So that's something you have to be careful about. And of course, if you are adding features, well, you want to make sure that you test those features. In this case, I don't believe HTML Builder has a test file, but if it did and the change I was making was significant enough, I would want to make sure to write a test to prove to Taylor that the additions or modifications that I have made do in fact pass. So then at this point, it's just a matter of waiting for Taylor to look over it and either approve it or close it. If they do close it, don't fret. That's nothing you need to be overly concerned about. At the end of the day, he needs to be the one to decide what is best for his framework. The most important thing, though, is that when you can, you do contribute. So what I'm going to do now is pause for any number of hours to wait for Taylor to look over this and either approve it or close it, and then we'll finish up the video. See you then. All right, and now, due to the magic of screencast editing, it's now 3 hours from when I just spoke 10 seconds ago, and you can see that Taylor's so quick, he's already reviewed it, he accepted it, and he has merged it into the master repo and closed the thread. So that, in a nutshell, is the basic process. To recap, if you are adding a considerable feature, then make sure that you create an issue, precede it with proposal within brackets, and let Taylor know what you would like to do. He will either say no or give you the go-ahead, in which case you fork the repo, you clone it, you create a new branch, you make your changes, you commit it, you push it back to your own repo, and then you submit a pull request, and be sure to reference that original proposal issue so that Taylor knows what this specific pull request corresponds to. So at this point, the only next step is for you to make your own pull request.